Hi, everyone. Here I am back at the top right corner of your screen again. Um, we've been talking about answering the call, the second aspect of the creative process in class. And we know that in order to do this, what's required is for us to take a leap of faith, to venture into the unknown, right? So here we are in the ordinary world, as we described it in the first aspect of the creative process, where we learn new skills, learn new habits, are able to develop an expertise. But if we want to do something different, if we want to be creative, we have to eventually leave that behind and answer the call to venture out beyond what we think we know. So you've just completed all of your role model projects, and all of these people that you presented to us are inspirational because they were able to take that leap. They were able to find enough courage and motivation to venture out into places that weren't explored before. Either they hadn't explored it themselves, or people just didn't want to in general. So why don't we? Why don't we, when faced with the option, choose to always answer the call? Well, obviously, as we've been talking about, a lot of it stems from fear and all the pessimistic thoughts that often flood our heads when we think about going into some place that we've never been to before, right? And for a lot of us, hopefully you had some sense of this by doing the Creative Role Model Project. If you had presented in ways that were creative, then you probably felt a little anxiety about doing it that way, right? If you ventured beyond your ordinary world of presentations, there would have been instinctually, inherently, some trepidation about, you know, presenting in some unusual way. So it's often fear that gets in the way. And we looked, or I asked you previously in lectures about, recalling some example in your own life where you overcame that fear that often keeps us in the ordinary world. And some of you gave examples like, moving from your home country to the U.S. and how new that is, and how unknown it was to go and decide to leave behind your culture and possibly the language that you're familiar with, and take the step into a new home. And some of you wrote or talked about how you were able to venture out beyond your ordinary world of your literal home that you grew up in with your parents in order to live out and be independent. Um, some of you wrote about leaving the military and how it was difficult to leave the ordinary world of that structure. I mean, we can often associate the ordinary world with order or structure, in addition to habit. So in the military, you can imagine how structured that is. And then when you leave that behind to go to civilian life, well, this is seemingly very unorganized and undisciplined and without much structure because we are optimizing freedom in the civilian life. Right? So all of these are great examples of how a lot of you overcame fear in order to venture out beyond your ordinary world. But can you think of examples in when you took a step, right, into the unknown and you failed, or you were hurt because you took the step and you landed, in a way that was not, in a way that was maybe traumatizing, or in a way that was painful to you? Maybe you took that leap of faith to ask that person out and they said no, or about that time when you took the leap of faith to apply to that job and you got the interview and they rejected you, or maybe submitted an entry into a poetry contest or a songwriting contest and they gave you some harsh feedback. Or maybe you went to an open mic someplace and you had the courage to step out on stage and perform, and maybe you were booed. And this is not uncommon. I mean, if we're going to venture out into the unknown, it should be expected that not every time you step out onto the ledge will you land safely. So if you've been hurt by this in the past, why should we ever do it? Why should we ever venture out into some place that's not safe? Why ever expose ourselves to pain or to the possibility of being hurt, right? And this is the theme for the story I had you read this week, this O. Henry story. And if you're not familiar with O. Henry, he wrote stories like the Gift of the Magi. These stories that at first glance you might get a sense, or you might have a belief, you have a sense for what the story's about, but then towards the end, he kind of gives you a new perspective on life somehow. So in this story of the Green Door, we're introduced to a man named Rudolf Steiner, this person that's always into taking on new adventures, and he's walking through this big city. In big cities, metropolitan areas, there's lights and, flashing signs, and there's always seemingly adventure around every corner, right? Just imagine anytime you've been into some downtown, like San Francisco or LA, and every store, every building, there's a mystery behind it, right? You don't know what's there. It could be something really interesting. So this is the type of person we're talking about. And here he is walking down the street, and there's a man in front of a building handing out cards, pieces of paper. And Rudolf Steiner is given one of these, and it says, Green Door on it. Well, that's interesting. Wonder what that means. He walks a little bit and thinks about some more. Green Door. Should I do something about that? That sounds like a mystery, right? What is the Green Door? And he notices on the ground a bunch of these papers too, and he looks at them, and he notices that none of them say Green Door on them, right? They say something about a doctor's office instead. But he looks at his card, and his says Green Door. And it feels to him as if he's being called, right? Being called to investigate this further. And he can't help himself but maybe delve into it. So he goes back to the building where that man was standing in front of him and figures, okay, well, the Green Door must be here someplace. And decides to step into the building and look for this Green Door. It's not on the first floor where there's a bunch of shops. And he goes up to the second floor, and there by a flickering light, right, he notices there's a Green Door. Okay, now put yourself in Steiner's shoes here. You get this weird piece of paper that says Green Door on it. And why would you ever decide to go and look for the Green Door? I mean, think about all the things that could go wrong here, right? Think about all the fears that would prevent you from doing it. Like, this is crazy. There could be somebody there that's gonna mug me. There could be somebody there that's out to harm me. So this could be a waste of time. Why would I ever do something that a piece of paper tells me to do? Right? Think about all these pessimistic thoughts that would prevent you from checking out and looking for the Green Door. And here's Steiner. He decides to do it anyway. Why? I mean, what would motivate somebody to take a piece of paper that says Green Door and actually go look for the Green Door? Well, here you are in front of the Green Door now. Well, ask yourself, what would you have to imagine that would give you the motivation to even knock once you're at that door? I mean, what sorts of things did you think would be behind that door that are worthy of you knocking on it, right? Maybe you might find somebody that has a job proposition for you, or somebody that might have a bag of cash for you, or maybe it's somebody that's a long-lost friend or a long-lost relative. I mean, what are all the positive sorts of outcomes that would motivate you to even knock at that door, right? Well, what happens eventually when he does? Is it any of those things? Is it any of the things that you would imagine would motivate you to knock on the door? Well, he opens the door, or he knocks on the door, and the door opens, and there's a frail woman there, right? Not some over-the-top, beautiful possible partner, not a bag of money, not somebody with a job offer for you, or not a bunch of musicians who you could jam with. Right, but a frail woman. And the frail woman ends up falling into his arms because she's so malnourished, and sickly. Not exactly the picture of what you might imagine, right, when you're motivated to figure out what's the Green Door. So he brings her, right, into her apartment and lays her down. When she comes to, she says, did I pass out again? Indicating that she's done this before. And they have this conversation where when she reveals that, she's been ill, and because she's been ill, she wasn't able to work. And like a lot of people in America, who live paycheck to paycheck, when she's unable to work, well, there goes her funds to pay for basic necessities like food. So what does Rudolph do? Well, he feels um, compassion and empathy for this person, and he rushes out to go get her food, and then comes back and enjoys this meal with her. And you get the sense that there's some sort of connection there, right? O. Henry talks about how there's this shared sense of loneliness, and Rudolph seems to resonate with this person, whether it's out of compassion and empathy, and in addition to that, possibly, just having this resonating with her because of the shared experience of loneliness. So Rudolph's about ready to walk out the door when she stops him, right, and inquires about him stopping by again. And this gives Rudolph great joy, right? She asks him, how did you even come to my door in the first place? And he hesitates telling her the truth, right? And he just mentioned that it's some sort of accident. He was looking for somebody else. But he's curious, how is it that I found this person? How is it that I ended up knocking on this girl's door? So he goes back down to the man who hands out the cards and asks, well, why did you give me this paper that says green door? Why did you do that? And he explains, well, I'm being paid to hand out these pieces of paper. I'm being paid by all these businesses in the area. Right? So there's a doctor office down there, and that's why he was handing out a bunch of pieces of paper for the doctor's office. And he points further down, and then there's a big sign for the green door. Rudolph thinks to himself, and how does he interpret that? Does he interpret this as being, that was just some dumb luck? This is some stupid accident that I ended up at this person's place? No, the way he contextualizes it, the way he experiences it, he says to himself, well, no, this is the plan. This is the way things were meant to be, right? So the question for us is, how much do we relate to Rudolph? How much do we relate to that sense of adventure? Or how many of us would have not taken, the call to answer the green door? And then you have to ask yourself, well, why would you do it in the first place? Why would you ever risk, right, some bad thing happening to you, to go back to the original question, to take part of an adventure like that, to go investigate your green door? Well, let's think about what happened when he got there. It didn't end up being anything that he may have imagined, right? And that's true for a lot of us when we partake in our adventures. We may have an idea or an image or a goal or a dream that compels us to leave behind our ordinary world. So for a lot of you, you may have had an image of what life in America would have been like or is like, right? For some of you who left home, you may have had an image of what that life would be like. Or if you're changing majors, you change degrees, some of you wrote about this. We may have an idea of what major we really want as opposed to the one our parents told us to have. But that may not happen, right? For Rudolph, he answered the door, he knocked on the door, and what he saw wasn't necessarily what he may have imagined would happen when you cross the threshold, leave your ordinary world behind. But what did he find there? What he found was an experience with somebody that he could not have imagined or that he did not imagine, and it ended up being a very meaningful experience. What O. Henry, one of the things O. Henry might be pointing out by the story is that in order to have some sort of a meaningful experience in life, you have to risk falling. That when you take that leap of faith, what makes it meaningful, what makes the experience meaningful is the fact that you could fall. Can you see that with your experiences with leaving the ordinary world behind? Or could you see that with any meaningful experiences you've had in your life? What makes starting a relationship meaningful is possibly the idea, says O. Henry, that it could fail. The reason why having a relationship with anybody, parents, friends, a pet, is that eventually those things will pass. Think about riding a tricycle. Three wheels. How meaningful is that experience for an adult to ride a tricycle? You look like a little kid riding a tricycle. The reason why it may not be so meaningful is because there's really no risk of failure. Your actions don't have much consequence. You take out two of those wheels and you end up riding a unicycle, well, then everything you do, the way you lean, right, the way you hold the handlebars, the way you move your legs, all of those things are of critical importance. All of your actions start to have more meaning. Seemingly, this is one of the things that Henry's trying to get across to us. That you answer the call, not because what you imagine will happen, not because you'll reach your goal, but because the experience is something, because it leads to meaningful experiences. And what's one of the hallmarks of this? Well, remember what Rudolph's philosophy is. He's out for the grand adventure of it all. He's out for experiencing and exploring the mystery. And seemingly, that's kind of what life is about, isn't it? I mean, you don't have the crystal ball to figure out everything that's going to be in front of your future. That's part of your future. Part of life is about delving into the mystery of life, engaging it. That's kind of what makes life interesting, isn't it? So seemingly, this is what O. Henry's telling us. And we see this, don't we, when we take a look at creative people? That we see them have this courage to take that leap of faith and to venture out beyond their ordinary world. I mean, here's the author of Harry Potter, J.K. Rowling, and she, obviously now she's very popular and very successful, but she used to write a lot of letters to publishers, asking them to publish her Harry Potter book. And she received tons and tons of rejection, and she's quoted as saying, "I wasn't going to give up until every single publisher turned me down, but I often feared that would happen." Kind of put yourself in her shoes, right? And you're putting your art out there to people to read. You're putting your art out there for people to reject. And she actually did experience that rejection over and over and over again. Think about the courage it took for her to overcome those rejection letters and to eventually, wind up as this popular author, not to mention, successful in wealth, right? And she likes to share this with her followers, right? So if you follow her Twitter feed, she'll sometimes post the rejection letters she received to show people that, rejection is kind of part of the process. Falling and failing is part of the process. And if everything came too easy, well, how meaningful would this be? If you knew automatically that your work would be published and the people would love you, how meaningful would your success be to you? So one company that epitomizes this philosophy is 3M. Do you know 3M? Do you think are you familiar with the name 3M? You're for sure familiar with their products because 3M's products are everywhere. Their motto is stumbling into innovation. Okay, so let's take a look at some of these products. If you've ever used Scotch Guard or Scotch Tape or Super Glue or Scotch Brite sponges, you'll see their products everywhere. If you've used any of these, then you're familiar with 3M. Their hands are in various different sorts of endeavors. So what do they mean by stumbling into innovation? Well, this is a quote from one of their executives, Richard P. Carlton. "You can't stumble if you're not in motion." Right? You can't stumble if you're not in motion. So it's kind of hard to find new ways of doing things, find new inventions, create new pieces of art unless you're moving, right? And moving means that you'll fall every once in a while. You'll stumble over rocks and over tree branches and roots, but moving is the important thing, right? Moving is the important thing, getting back up and continually moving. Because it's only by moving that you venture out beyond your ordinary world. And then think about this person who I had you watch for today's lecture, Tommy DeCarlo. Think about the fears and pessimistic thoughts he had to overcome in order to go from being a father working at Home Depot to becoming the lead singer for one of the world's most popular rock bands. So I know you may not be familiar with them because of how old you guys are. But Boston, hopefully you recognize some of these songs in the video. Boston is one of the world's most popular rock bands. I mean, think about how he had to have the courage to just post himself singing onto his MySpace page in the first place. I mean, how many of us fear putting our work out there to be criticized by other people, especially singing, right? Think about how he had to overcome fear to sing on a stage for the first time with the band. Remember, when he went onto stage to sing with them, that was his first time ever singing live in front of an audience. Think about how much fear he had to overcome to do that. And then think about his ordinary world where he's defined as a dad, a middle-aged dad who works at Home Depot with a stable job, needing to take care of his family. Think about how he had to overcome all those assumptions about who he thought he was and how he has to behave in order to leave that behind, join a rock band, tour. I mean, he obviously did not necessarily have the confidence back then when he was first working at Home Depot to be part of a rock band. But think about the courage it took to develop that. Take the leap of faith to participate in becoming the lead singer of this band. Can you see how this all was also portrayed in the Truman Show? Think about all the quotes you had written about and how that's probably indicative of all the thoughts that these people had to overcome in order to venture out beyond the ordinary world and answer the call, right? Think about how Truman was being told how unsafe it was to leave and how there were signs everywhere talking about how why would you ever want to venture out beyond Sea Haven? There's nothing really more to learn about Sea Haven, about the world other than what's here in Sea Haven. Think about how these thoughts may have been part of, all of these individuals' thinking process, but they had to overcome them. They overcame them somehow, just as all your creative role models overcame them, right? In order to experience something meaningful, in order to partake in something meaningful, even though there's no guarantee of success. And this is what I want you to think about with your final projects, right? So we're now at the halfway point of our course. Seems odd, right? We're now at the halfway point of our course, and I want you to start thinking about how you can take the leap of faith into doing something meaningful for yourself. I want you to start thinking about what you want to make. What can you make that would be meaningful to you, that you would really enjoy doing? Now, for the final project, what you'll end up doing is you'll end up describing how you've experienced all of the different aspects of the creative process on the way of creating whatever it is you're creating. So the project that you're working on has to be complicated enough, involved enough, so that you'll have enough to write about. So you might be thinking to yourself, okay, I'll just write one short poem. Well, I mean, that by itself probably isn't involved enough for you to write about how you experienced all the different aspects of the creative process. But a short booklet of poetry might work, or a short collection of poetry might work. Or maybe if you are thinking, well, I'll just write, I'll just draw a sketch of a vase, right? Well, that might not be involved enough for you to write about how you experienced all the different aspects of the creative process. But maybe you'll write or create a sketchbook full of, other images, right? Or you'll create variations on a vase and have various different variations on this, right? Or maybe this vase will be part of a larger image that you'll sketch out, that'll draw out, right? Maybe it's a larger image of a room. So it has to be large enough or complicated enough for you to be able to experience everything we'll be discussing in our class about creativity. Two is I really want you to think about stuff that you're interested in. Don't think of just doing something for a homework assignment. Think about, well, what in your life would you like to make? What in your life would you like to create for yourself? The caveat for us, because of the way our class works, is it has to be something tangible, right? You can't just say, I'm going to create a new workout plan. Well, that's not really tangible. That's not something you're making with your hands, right? Maybe a workout app, a workout plan, motivational poster, right? You can't just say, I want to create a new routine in my life, because that's not something you're creating with your hands. But again, you can create a new a schedule for your day that you use an app for, that you create using calendars with. Maybe you create an inspirational video for yourself on how to go about your day, right? So this has to be something that you manifest physically. But the key is I want you to do something that really you're really interested in. Because if you don't choose something you're interested in, then why even do it, right? This is for you. I want you to do something for yourself. And then three is I want you to think big, right? Think big. If you want to write a book, then start your book. If you want to create a business, then start your business. Don't think small, think big. And then wherever you end up at the end of the term, well, that's what you have, right? That's what you'll show us. But think big. Because if you think big, if you have those big dreams, like we talked about with Disney, it gives you the energy to propel yourself forward, the motivation, right? Okay, so this is what I want you to think about for your projects, and you'll be turning in a project proposal sometime soon. And you'll just tell me, yeah, I want to work on blank. I want to work on a film. I want to work on a song. I want to work on a piece of visual art. I want to work on a book. And you'll tell me, right? And I'll give you the approval, and then you can start working on it. So here's where we are so far in the creative process. We've talked about the ordinary world, right? You develop habits and skills. You learn to develop expertise. You feel grounded and safe and secure. But of course, if you want to be creative, you have to go beyond that. You have to answer the call and overcome your fears and pessimistic thoughts in order to venture out beyond your ordinary world. And when you do that, you start to enter the sea of possibilities. Okay, so what does that mean? Let's introduce that concept in this lecture. What does it mean to enter the sea of possibilities? Well, here's how Picasso puts it. Right? Picasso says, every act of creation is, first of all, an act of destruction. So what does it mean that every act of creation is, first of all, an act of destruction? Well, here is the exercise I had you do for this week's activity. So I wanted you to draw a creative flower, or come up with a creative drawing of a flower. How many of you had difficulty with that? Or how many of you looked at what you ended up turning in and said to yourself, well, I don't know, man, that's not like super creative, but it's something, right? Well, what can we do to have had more creative ideas when we created our creative flower? Well, the first thing you may have wanted to do is to outline, sketch out what your ordinary world of drawing a flower is. So let's take a look at a typical flower drawing. Okay, I'll present it here on the screen. And this might represent what a lot of you started out with in your head as the ordinary world of a flower. So what would be the ordinary approach to drawing a flower? Well, you may have first started out with like a straight line someplace, maybe green, maybe thin, as like the stem of your flower. And then maybe for some of you, you decided to put little ovals, right along the stem to represent, the leaves of not petals, I guess these are the leaves of the flower. And then maybe you said to yourself, okay, well, flowers have to have this circle in it, and then have these like, I don't know what you'd call these, half circles around the oval to represent like the, the petals and the center of the flower. But what else defines your ordinary world of drawing a flower? Maybe you put down hash lines at the bottom of your page, green hash lines to indicate grass where the flower might be growing from. And then for some of you, you may have put a yellow circle somewhere on your page with some yellow lines to indicate sun and sunshine, right? Okay, so once you define your ordinary world of drawing a flower, how does this help you? For the past few weeks, we've looked at doing this as a way of appreciating creativity, right? As a way of acknowledging that there's something creative here because what this person has done, your role model, goes beyond the ordinary world. Well, what does that mean for what you can do to have drawn a more creative flower? Remember what Picasso says, every act of creation is first of all an act of destruction. Well, here is your ordinary world. What do you have to do to it to come up with something new? You kind of have to destroy it, don't you? You have to throw it away. You have to challenge all of these things. What could you have done to come up with a creative version of this? Well, let's take a look at what we have for our ordinary world. Long, thin, green line for a stem. Well, what can you do differently instead of having a long, thin, green line? It could have been short. It could have been wide. It could have been a different color other than green. How about this not even being a line? How about we challenge the assumption that this thing needs to be a line for the stem and put something else in there? What would you put besides a line? A circle, a square, a triangle? Well, how about something other than a shape? What about a car instead of a long green line? Right? What about a piece of pizza instead of a long green line? Right? How about the petals instead of these ovals for the petals? What else could you have put in? Well, how about triangles? Right? How about baseball mitts? Or how about footballs? How about for the petals? Did I just say petals? Yeah, those are the leaves. Or how about for the petals and the center of the flower? Instead of a circle, what could you have? Instead of a shape, what could you have? Maybe a house. How about a mug that you drink coffee out of? What about a person's face? Right? Do you see how much easier it is to come up with creative ideas if you first challenge the assumptions you have in the ordinary world? Can you imagine how much easier it come up with creative ideas if you first define the ordinary world? Because all you need to do to be creative is go do something different than that. Or I guess it'd be this way on your screen. Do something different than that, right? Do something different than what you have in your ordinary world. So one of the reasons why we define the ordinary world isn't just to give us a sense for why something is creative in contrast. We can define the ordinary world because then it becomes easier to figure out what we can do to be creative, because all we have to do is challenge those assumptions. Throw away those ordinary world beliefs. Now, when you do this, it's not as if you can't come back to it later, right? If you destroy ordinary world, if you let it go, it doesn't mean you can't incorporate it into your final, piece of art, your final approach to finding money or making money. It doesn't mean you can't incorporate that later, but it means that in order to venture out into the sea of possibilities, you can't have that tying you down. Because what often is an obstacle to us fully embarking along this journey, besides fear, besides unconsciousness and complacency, is that the ordinary world is literally pulling us back. It's holding us down. So, says Picasso, you need to destroy that. You need to destroy those ties. In order to do that, we need to develop what's referred to as cognitive flexibility. Cognitive flexibility. Here's an image that kind of represents that. They only taught me how to think outside of the box. I'm not trained for circles. Cognitive flexibility is your ability to shift perspectives. It's your ability to alter the point of view through which you're thinking about something. Cognitive flexibility is your ability to challenge your assumptions, right? So while the first aspect requires us to become more self-aware and more conscious of the beliefs and assumptions that dictate our ordinary world, while fear gets in the way from us answering the call to venture out to the unknown. What we need also, says the third aspect, is the ability to shift perspectives, having that mental muscle that allows us to see things in new ways. Now, what often prevents us from doing that is one, certain aspects of how our brain functions, the way our brain is wired, prevents us from doing that. And two, social conformity. That being mammals means that we have a propensity to want to stick with others to maintain social bonds. So when we come back in our next lecture, we'll talk about both of those and we'll talk about ways of overcoming them.